Part 1. The Melody That Changed Everything. The last customer had left the Golden Terrace nearly an hour ago, but Natalie Rivers was still there, methodically cleaning tables and arranging chairs in the dimly lit restaurant. The upscale establishment, with its crystal chandeliers and mahogany furnishings, felt different in the quiet hours after closing, more intimate, less intimidating. At 24, Natalie had been working as a waitress here for 2 years, serving wealthy patrons who barely noticed her existence beyond her ability to deliver their expensive meals with a smile. Her fingertips traced the edge of the grand piano that sat in the corner of the main dining room, a beautiful Steinway that was typically used for evening entertainment. The regular pianist had called in sick that week, leaving the instrument silent and neglected. Natalie glanced around the empty restaurant, confirming she was alone. Elena, the restaurant manager, had left 30 minutes earlier, trusting Natalie, with the final closing duties. Unable to resist any longer, Natalie approached the piano bench and sat down carefully. Her fingers found the keys naturally, as if they belonged there. She had learned to play as a child, taking lessons at the community center until her family could no longer afford them after her father lost his job. Music had been her escape, her passion, her dream, until reality forced her to focus on survival instead. The melody that flowed from her fingers was hauntingly beautiful, a piece by Debussy that she had memorized years ago. Clair de Lune filled the empty restaurant with its ethereal notes, transforming the space into something magical. Natalie closed her eyes, losing herself in the music, feeling the stress of the day melt away. For these precious moments, she wasn't just a waitress struggling to pay rent. She was an artist, expressing her soul through the language of music. What she didn't know was that she had an audience. Daniel Stone sat in the shadows of the private dining room, his laptop still open from the business meeting that had run later than expected. The 32-year-old CEO of Stone Technologies had built his company from nothing, becoming one of the youngest billionaires in the country. He was known for his sharp business acumen, his perfectionist nature, and his ability to see potential where others saw obstacles. When the piano music began, Daniel looked up from his financial reports, immediately captivated. The melody was flawless, but more than that, it was filled with emotion, longing, hope, and a deep sadness that spoke to something within him. He had attended countless concerts and owned several rare musical instruments, but he had never heard anything quite like this. The musician played with technical skill, yes, but also with a vulnerability that made his chest tighten. Curiosity getting the better of him, Daniel quietly made his way toward the main dining room, staying in the shadows, to avoid disturbing the performance. What he saw surprised him completely. It wasn't a professional musician who had somehow gained access to the restaurant. It was Natalie, the waitress who had served his table earlier that evening. He had noticed her before, of course. She was beautiful in an understated way, with warm brown eyes and auburn hair that she always kept, pulled back in a neat ponytail during work. But more than her appearance, there was something genuine about her interactions with customers, a warmth that stood out in a place where most of the staff seemed to perform their roles with practiced indifference. She remembered orders without writing them down, genuinely smiled when asked how she was doing, and somehow made even the most demanding patrons feel heard. Watching her play, Daniel saw a completely different person. Her usual professional composure had melted away, replaced by raw artistic expression. Her eyes were closed, her body swaying slightly with the music, completely absorbed in the moment. There was a grace to her movements, an intimacy in how she touched the keys that made Daniel feel like he was witnessing something deeply personal. The piece came to an end, the final notes hanging in the air like a question waiting for an answer. Natalie sat still for a moment, her hands resting on the keys, apparently reluctant to break the spell. "That was extraordinary," Daniel said softly from the shadows. Natalie's eyes flew open and she spun around, her face flushing with embarrassment and alarm. "I'm so sorry. I thought everyone had left. I didn't mean to. Please don't apologize, Daniel said, stepping into the light. That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. Natalie recognized him immediately. Mr. Stone, one of their most distinguished regular customers. He always sat at table 12, usually conducting business meetings over expensive wine and perfectly prepared meals. She had served him dozens of times, but they had rarely exchanged more than polite pleasantries. Now, seeing him in his perfectly tailored suit, his dark hair slightly tousled and his usually stern expression softened with something like wonder, she felt her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with being caught. I should have asked permission to use the piano, she said, standing quickly and smoothing down her black work dress. Elena doesn't like it when staff— Do you play professionally? Daniel interrupted, genuinely curious. Natalie laughed, but there was no humor in it. Hardly. I'm just a waitress who took piano lessons as a kid. This isn't exactly Carnegie Hall. Talent doesn't depend on the venue, Daniel replied, moving closer to the piano. I've heard performances at Carnegie Hall that had less soul than what you just played. Where did you study? The question made Natalie uncomfortable. She couldn't exactly explain that her musical education had ended when she was 15 because her family couldn't afford to continue the lessons. Just around. Community center mostly. Daniel nodded, sensing there was more to the story but not wanting to pry. Debussy is one of my favorites. My mother used to play his pieces when I was young. Used to? Natalie asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. She passed away when I was 16, Daniel said simply. Cancer. She was a pianist before she married my father. Not professionally, but she was incredibly talented. I'm sorry, Natalie said, and Daniel could hear the genuine sympathy in her voice. It wasn't the practiced condolence he usually received when people learned about his loss. It was real empathy from someone who understood grief. She stopped playing after she got married, Daniel continued, not sure why he was sharing this, with a woman he barely knew. My father thought it was frivolous, not suitable for the wife of a businessman. She gave up her passion for his expectations. Natalie felt a chill run down her spine. How many women had given up their dreams for? Someone else's idea of what they should be? That must have been hard for her. I think it was harder than she ever let on, Daniel admitted. Watching you play just now, it reminded me of how she looked when she thought no one was watching, like she was finally free to be herself. Their eyes met across the space between them, and something electric passed between them. Natalie felt like he was seeing her, really seeing her, in a way that no one had in years. Not as the cheerful waitress who brought food and cleaned tables, but as a person with dreams and talents and depths that rarely saw the light of day. I should finish closing up, Natalie said finally, breaking the moment, but not the connection that had formed between them. Of course, Daniel replied, glancing at his expensive watch. I didn't realize how late it had gotten. Thank you for the performance, even if it wasn't intended for me. Thank you for listening, Natalie said, surprising herself with her boldness. As Daniel gathered his laptop and papers from the private dining room, he found himself reluctant to leave. There was something about Natalie that intrigued him beyond her musical talent. A strength beneath her gentle exterior, an intelligence that sparkled in her eyes even when she was just taking orders for overpriced steaks. Natalie, he said as he prepared to leave. Would you mind if I asked Elena to schedule the piano entertainment more regularly? I think the restaurant's atmosphere would benefit from live music. She looked at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. That would be nice, but the regular pianist should be back next week. I wasn't thinking of the regular pianist, Daniel said with a slight smile that transformed his usually serious face. Good night, Natalie. After he left, Natalie stood alone in the restaurant, her heart still racing from their conversation. She had always known that Daniel Stone was wealthy and successful, His reputation preceded him, and his expensive suits and confident demeanor made it obvious. But tonight, she had seen something different in him. When he talked about his mother, his usual business-like facade had cracked, revealing someone who understood loss and regret and the pain of dreams deferred. As she finished her closing duties and locked up the restaurant, Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken an unexpected turn. The encounter felt like the beginning of something, though she couldn't say what. All she knew was that for the first time in years, someone had seen her true self and hadn't turned away. Walking home through the quiet city streets, Natalie replayed every moment of their conversation, every look they had shared. She had felt beautiful under his gaze, not just physically, but artistically, spiritually. It was a feeling she had almost forgotten existed, and it both thrilled and terrified her. What she didn't know was that across town, in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Daniel Stone was having similar thoughts. He had built his fortune by recognizing potential in technologies, in markets, in people, and tonight he had discovered potential that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way his heart had responded to both her music and her presence. For the first time in years, Daniel found himself looking forward to visiting the Golden Terrace, for reasons that had nothing to do with their excellent wine selection or convenient location. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. 3 weeks had passed since that magical evening at the piano, and Daniel Stone had become a regular presence at the Golden Terrace. What had once been occasional business dinners had transformed into almost nightly visits, always requesting table 12, always asking for Natalie as his server. She found herself looking forward to his arrival each evening, their conversations gradually extending beyond the usual customer-server interactions. "He's here again," Grace whispered to Natalie as they prepared drink orders at the service station. Grace had been Natalie's roommate and closest friend since college, working as a nurse at the local hospital. She had heard every detail about the mysterious billionaire who seemed genuinely interested in her best friend. "I know," Natalie replied, trying to keep her voice casual while her heart raced. She glanced toward table 12 where Daniel sat, reading through some documents, occasionally looking up toward the service area as if hoping to catch her eye. "This is the 15th time in 3 weeks, Nat," Grace continued with a knowing smile. "Men don't eat that much expensive food unless they're trying to impress someone or they have ulterior motives. Maybe he just likes the atmosphere," Natalie said, but even she didn't believe her own words anymore. Their interactions had evolved gradually. What started as polite exchanges about menu items had become discussions about music, books, and their different perspectives on life. Daniel would linger over his meals, asking about her day, sharing stories about his travels, and always asking if she had been playing piano. Last week, he had even convinced Elena to let Natalie play a short set during the evening service, claiming it would enhance the dining experience for all customers. As Natalie approached his table that evening, Daniel looked up with the genuine smile that had become familiar to her. "Good evening, Natalie. How was your day?" "Busy, but good," she replied, setting down the wine menu he never actually needed since he always ordered the same bottle of vintage Bordeaux. "The usual tonight?" "Actually, I was hoping you might have some time after your shift," Daniel said, his confidence wavering slightly. "There's something I'd like to show you, if you're interested." Natalie felt her pulse quicken. In all their conversations, he had never asked to see her outside the restaurant. "What kind of something?" "There's a small concert at the Riverside Arts Center tonight, a young pianist performing some of the pieces you mentioned loving. I thought, you might enjoy it." The offer was tempting, but Natalie hesitated. Accepting would cross a line from friendly customer interactions to something that felt dangerously close to a date. "I don't know if that's appropriate." "As friends," Daniel added quickly, sensing her reservation. I have season tickets and my usual companion canceled. It would be a shame to waste the seat. After finishing her shift, Natalie found herself changing into her best dress in the restaurant's staff room, a simple navy blue outfit that Grace had insisted she keep at work for emergencies. She had texted her roommate about the unexpected plans, receiving an immediate response of excited emojis and strict instructions to enjoy every minute. Daniel was waiting in the lobby, having traded his business suit for dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that made him look younger and more approachable. When he saw her, his expression shifted to something close to awe. "You look beautiful," he said simply, then seemed surprised by his own honesty. "Thank you," Natalie replied, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The Arts Center was an intimate venue with excellent acoustics, and their seats were in the third row, close enough to see every expression on the young pianist's face. As the music began, Natalie became completely absorbed, her eyes closed during the most emotional passages, her hands moving slightly as if she were playing along. Daniel found himself watching her more than the performance. The way she responded to the music was mesmerizing, her face reflecting every emotion the composer had intended, her breathing changing with the tempo, her entire being engaged with the artistry unfolding before them. During a particularly beautiful passage, tears gathered in her eyes, and Daniel had to restrain himself from reaching over to take her hand. During intermission, they walked to the lobby for refreshments, continuing their discussion about the performance. "The way she approached the Rachmaninoff was incredible," Natalie said, her face animated with excitement. "Most pianists try to overpower those pieces, but she let the emotion speak for itself." "You have such insight into the music," Daniel observed. "Have you ever considered performing professionally?" Natalie's expression dimmed slightly. "That's not really an option for someone like me." "What do you mean, someone like you?" "Someone without formal training, without connections, without the money for proper coaching and auditions," she said matter-of-factly. "The music world isn't exactly welcoming to waitresses from small apartments." Daniel frowned. "Talent doesn't care about your bank account or your address." "Maybe not, but the industry does," Natalie replied with a sad smile. "It's okay, really. I've made peace with it. Music is something I do for myself now." "But what if it didn't have to be?" Daniel asked quietly. Before Natalie could respond, the lights flickered, signaling the end of intermission. As they returned to their seats, Daniel's words hung between them, heavy with possibility and implication. After the concert, Daniel offered to drive her home, and Natalie accepted, not ready for the evening to end. In the quiet comfort of his car, their conversation took on a more personal tone. "Can I ask you something?" Natalie said as they drove through the city streets. "Of course. Why do you come to the restaurant so often? And please don't say it's for the food because I've seen you barely touch your meals half the time." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "Because when I'm there, listening to you talk about music or watching you interact with other customers, I remember what it feels like to be genuinely interested in something beyond profit margins and market shares." His honesty surprised them, both. Natalie turned to study his profile in the dim light of the car. "Your work doesn't fulfill you?" "It did, for a long time," Daniel admitted. "Building the company, proving I could succeed, making my mark on the world. But lately it feels empty, like I'm going through the motions of a life rather than actually living one." "And you think I can change that?" Natalie asked softly. "Think you already have," he replied, pulling up to her apartment building. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both aware that something significant was happening between them, but uncertain how to proceed. "Daniel," Natalie began, then stopped herself. "What is it?" "We're from very different worlds," she said finally. "I serve coffee to people like you for a living. You probably spend more on wine in a week than I make in a month." "Money doesn't determine worth," Daniel said firmly. and worlds can be bridged if both people are willing to try. The next evening, Daniel arrived at the restaurant with a proposal that left Natalie speechless. Elena had approached her during her shift to inform her that a generous patron had arranged for her to audition for the Riverside Arts Center's Emerging Artist Program, a prestigious opportunity that included training, performance opportunities, and financial support. "You did this," Natalie said when she reached his table, the audition information clutched in her trembling hands. "I made some calls," Daniel admitted, "but the audition is yours to earn. I can open doors, but I can't play piano for you." "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because the world deserves to hear your music," he said simply. "And because I can't stand the thought of you giving up your dreams the way my mother did." That weekend, Natalie stood backstage at the Arts Center, her hands shaking as she prepared for the most important audition of her life. She had spent every free moment of the past week practicing, Grace serving as her supportive audience, and Daniel offering encouragement through daily text messages. When her name was called, Natalie walked to the piano with as much confidence as she could muster. The panel of judges looked intimidating behind their table, clipboards ready, expressions neutral. She sat at the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The piece she had chosen was Chopin's Ballade No. 1, a technically demanding work that would showcase both her skill and her emotional range. As the music flowed from her fingers, she forgot about the judges, forgot about her nerves, forgot about everything except the connection between her heart and the keys. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment before the head judge, an elderly woman with kind eyes, smiled warmly. "Ms. Rivers, that was exceptional. We'll be in touch within the week." Daniel was waiting for her in the lobby when she emerged, his face anxious despite his attempts to appear calm. "How did it go?" he asked immediately. "I don't know," Natalie replied honestly. "I played my best, but there were some incredibly talented people auditioning. Then you have nothing to worry about," Daniel said with confidence she didn't feel. 3 days later, Natalie received the call that changed everything. She had been accepted into the program with a full scholarship. When she called Daniel to share the news, she could hear the genuine joy in his voice. "I knew it," he said. "I knew they would see what I see in you." That evening, he took her to dinner at a small, intimate restaurant far from the usual luxury establishments he frequented. Over wine and candlelight, they talked about her future, her dreams, and the strange turns their lives had taken. "I have a confession," Daniel said as they shared dessert. "When I first heard you play, it wasn't just your talent that captivated me. It was you. The way you lose yourself in the music, the way you care about everyone around you, the way you've maintained your kindness despite life not always being kind to you." Natalie felt her breath catch. "Daniel, I know this complicates things," he continued. "I know we come from different places, and I know my life comes with complications you never asked for. But I also know that I haven't felt this way about anyone in my life. How do you feel?" she asked quietly. "Like I've been waiting for you without knowing it," he replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. The touch was electric, sending warmth up her arm and straight to her heart. "I feel the same way," she admitted, "but I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of not being enough for your world. Of people thinking I'm with you for your money. Of losing myself in trying to fit into a life I was never meant for." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "You could never lose yourself, Natalie. Your authenticity is what makes you extraordinary, and anyone who thinks you're anything less than amazing doesn't deserve to know you." As they left the restaurant that night, Daniel walked her to her apartment building, neither wanting the evening to end. Under the soft glow of the streetlight, he cupped her face gently in his hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. In response, Natalie rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, then deeper as they both gave in to the feelings they had been fighting for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "What happens now?" Natalie whispered. "Now we figure it out together," Daniel replied, resting his forehead against hers. As Natalie climbed the stairs to her apartment, her heart was full of hope and possibility. For the first time in her life, her dreams seemed within reach, and she had found someone who believed in her enough to help her reach them. But in the back of her mind, a small voice wondered if fairy tales could really come true for girls like her. Meanwhile, across town in his penthouse office, Victor Kane was reviewing newspaper clippings and photographs that would soon threaten everything Daniel and Natalie were beginning to build together. The newspaper headlines stared back at Natalie from the coffee shop table where Grace had placed it. "Tech Billionaire's Mystery Romance, From Rags to Riches Love Story or Calculated Social Climb." Below it was a grainy photograph of her and Daniel leaving the restaurant where they had shared their first kiss 2 weeks earlier. "I'm so sorry, Nat," Grace said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I wanted to show you before someone else did." Natalie read the article with growing horror. It painted her as an opportunistic waitress who had seduced a wealthy businessman, complete with speculation about her motives and detailed descriptions of their vastly different backgrounds. The reporter had somehow obtained information about her modest apartment, her student loans, even her parents' financial struggles before their deaths. "They make me sound like some kind of gold digger," Natalie whispered, her hands trembling as she set down the paper. "Anyone who knows you would never believe that," Grace said firmly. "Daniel certainly doesn't." But Natalie wasn't so sure. The article had appeared that morning, and she hadn't heard from Daniel all day. Unusual since they had been texting regularly and seeing each other almost every evening since their first kiss. The silence felt ominous. What she didn't know was that Daniel was in the middle of a heated confrontation with Victor Kane in his office across town. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Victor said, tossing the newspaper onto Daniel's desk. "The board is already asking questions about your judgment. First, the questionable business decisions, now a public relations nightmare." "My personal life is not up for board approval," Daniel replied coldly, though the article had shaken him more than he cared to admit. He had grown up in the public eye and was used to media attention, but seeing Natalie portrayed so harshly made his chest tight with protective anger. "Your personal life becomes company business when it affects stock prices," Victor shot back. "Do you see how this looks? The CEO of a major corporation dating a waitress? The press is having a field day with the class differences." "I don't care how it looks." "Well, you should care how it affects her," Victor said, his tone shifting to something that almost resembled concern. "I've had 3 reporters call this morning asking for comments about Ms. Rivers. They're digging into her background, her finances, her family history. Is that really what you want for her?" Daniel stared out his office window at the city below, Victor's words hitting their mark. He had always known that his wealth and status came with scrutiny, but he had been naive to think he could protect Natalie from it. The article was just the beginning. If their relationship continued, she would be subjected to constant media attention, judgment, and invasion of privacy. "What are you suggesting?" Daniel asked quietly. "End it before it gets worse for both of you," Victor replied. "She's a lovely girl, but she doesn't belong in this world. You're setting her up for a lifetime of criticism and yourself for distraction from what really matters: the company." That evening, Daniel arrived at the Golden Terrace with a heavy heart. He had spent the afternoon wrestling with Victor's words, knowing there was truth in them, even if he hated admitting it. When he saw Natalie approaching his table, her usual warm smile replaced by careful professionalism, he knew she had seen the article. "Good evening, Mr. Stone," she said formally, back to using his last name for the first time in weeks. "Will you be dining with us tonight?" The distance in her voice cut through him like a blade. "Natalie, we need to talk." "I'm working," she replied, not meeting his eyes. Perhaps we could discuss whatever business matter you have at a more appropriate time. This isn't business, and you know it. Isn't it? She asked, finally looking at him directly. According to the morning paper, I'm just a social climbing waitress trying to get her hands on your money. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't know what this really is. You know that's not true. Do I? Natalie's voice was barely controlled. You haven't called or texted all day. The first time we get negative press, you disappear. That tells me everything I need to know about how much you believe in us. Daniel's jaw tightened. I was trying to figure out how to protect you from this. Protect me? Or protect yourself from the embarrassment of being associated with someone beneath your social status? That's not fair, and you know it. Elena appeared at Daniel's shoulder, her expression disapproving. Mr. Stone, I'm going to have to ask you to keep your voice down or take this conversation elsewhere. You're disturbing other guests. Of course, Daniel said, standing abruptly. Ms. Rivers, if you change your mind about talking, you know where to find me. After he left, Natalie felt like she could finally breathe, though the relief was accompanied by a crushing sense of loss. She had been falling in love with Daniel Stone, but perhaps Grace had been wrong. Perhaps fairy tales weren't meant for girls like her. 3 days passed without contact between them. Natalie threw herself into preparing for her first performance with the Arts Center program, spending every free moment practicing and trying not to think about the empty feeling in her chest. Daniel buried himself in work, snapping at employees and staring at his phone constantly, wanting to call her, but convinced that Victor was right about protecting her from his world. It was Mrs. Whitmore who finally forced the issue. The elderly, director of the Riverside Arts Center, appeared at Daniel's office unannounced on Friday afternoon, somehow having convinced his secretary to let her through. Mr. Stone, she said, settling into the chair across from his desk without invitation. We need to discuss Natalie Rivers. I'm not sure what there is to discuss, Daniel replied carefully. Don't play games with me, young man. I've been in the arts world for 40 years, and I know talent when I see it. That girl has more musical ability in her little finger than most of our formally trained students have in their entire bodies. I'm glad she's working out in the program. She's not working out, Mrs. Whitmore said bluntly. She's barely functioning. She plays technically well, but the emotion is gone. The passion that made her audition extraordinary has disappeared, and I have a feeling you know why. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Her personal life is her own business. Her personal life is affecting her art, which makes it my business, the older woman replied sharply. I don't know what happened between you two, and I don't particularly care about the gossip or the newspaper nonsense. What I care about is that one of the most promising young musicians I've ever encountered is withering away because she's in love with a fool. She's better off without me, Daniel said quietly. My world comes with too much scrutiny, too much judgment. She deserves better. What she deserves is the chance to decide that for herself, Mrs. Whitmore snapped. You think you're protecting her, but you're actually making the choice for her, just like your father did for your mother. The comparison hit Daniel like a physical blow. That's different. Is it? Your mother gave up her music because your father convinced her it wasn't appropriate for someone in his social circle. Now you're pushing away a woman you love because you've decided she can't handle being in yours. How is that different? Daniel stared at the older woman, her words forcing him to confront the parallel he had been avoiding. What if she gets hurt? What if the media attention becomes too much? Then you support her through it, Mrs. Whitmore said simply. You don't abandon her because it might be difficult. Love isn't about avoiding challenges, Mr. Stone. It's about facing them together. After Mrs. Whitmore left, Daniel sat alone in his office as the sun set over the city, finally understanding what he needed to do. He had been so focused on protecting Natalie from his world that he had forgotten to consider what she might want, what she might be willing to fight for. That evening, Natalie was in the middle of a practice session at the Arts Center when Daniel appeared in the doorway of the rehearsal room. She stopped playing immediately, her heart racing at the sight of him. "I'm sorry for interrupting," he said quietly. "I know you're working." "What do you want, Daniel?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "To apologize? To explain? To ask you to give us another chance?" Natalie closed the piano lid and turned to face him fully. "The newspaper was right about one thing. We are from different worlds. Maybe it's better if we stop pretending otherwise." "Or maybe," Daniel said, stepping into the room, "we stop letting other people define what our world should look like." He pulled out his phone and showed her a press release that had been published an hour earlier. "Stone Technologies announces major philanthropic initiative, supporting arts education and community music programs." Natalie read the release with growing amazement. Daniel's company was donating millions to establish music programs in underserved communities, with the first grant going to expand the Riverside Arts Center and create a scholarship fund for talented students regardless of their economic background. "You did this?" she asked, looking up at him. "I did this because it's right," Daniel replied. "Because music should be accessible to everyone, not just people who can afford expensive lessons and fancy schools. Because talent exists everywhere, and it deserves to be nurtured." "And because of me?" "Because of you, yes. But also because of my mother and every other person who gave up their dreams because someone told them they didn't fit in the right world." Natalie felt tears gathering in her eyes. "The media will still criticize us. They'll still say terrible things." "Probably," Daniel agreed, moving closer to her. "But I'd rather face criticism with you than live safely without you. I've been miserable these past few days, Natalie. Nothing feels right when you're not in my life." "I've been miserable too," she admitted softly. "Mrs. Whitmore told me you've been struggling with the program. Everything feels empty without you," Natalie said, finally letting her guard down. "I tried to convince myself that I was better off alone, that I could go back to how things were before, but I can't. You've changed everything for me." Daniel reached for her hands, relieved when she didn't pull away. "I don't care what anyone says about us. I don't care about the newspaper articles or the board meetings or Victor's concerns about propriety. I care about you, and I care about us. What about your business? Your reputation? My business will survive, and my reputation will be fine. But I won't survive losing you," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you, Natalie. I love your talent, your kindness, your strength, the way you see beauty in everything around you. I love that you make me want to be better than I am." "I love you too," Natalie whispered, the words she had been holding back finally finding their voice. "I've been falling in love with you since that first night when you listened to me play." Daniel cupped her face gently in his hands. "Then, let's stop running from this. Let's stop letting fear make our decisions for us." "What if people never accept us?" Natalie asked. "Then we'll prove them wrong," Daniel replied firmly. Together, their second kiss was different from their first, deeper, more desperate, filled with the relief of almost losing each other and the joy of choosing to fight for their love instead. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "There's something else," Daniel said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I bought this before the article came out, before everything got complicated. I've been carrying it around for days, trying to figure out the right time." He pulled out a small velvet box, and Natalie's breath caught. "This isn't a proposal," he said quickly, seeing her wide eyes. "It's a promise that I'm all in, that I'm willing to fight for us, that I want to build a future together if you'll have me." Inside the box was a delicate ring with a small, perfect diamond surrounded by tiny musical note engravings. It was beautiful and thoughtful, and so perfectly suited to her that Natalie felt tears spill over. It's a promise that we'll face whatever comes together, Daniel continued. And when you're ready, when we're both ready, I'll ask you the bigger question with a bigger ring. Yes, Natalie said, laughing through her tears. Yes to the promise, yes to facing things together, yes to all of it. Daniel slipped the ring onto her right hand, both of them marveling at how perfectly it fit, how right it looked there. What happens now? Natalie asked. Now we go public on our own terms, Daniel said. I've arranged for an interview with Rebecca Martinez from Arts and Culture magazine. She's fair, she's respected, and she actually cares about the story behind the headlines. You want us to do an interview together? I want the world to know how proud I am to be with you, Daniel replied. I want them to hear your story from you, not from some gossip columnist who's never met you. I want them to understand that this isn't about social climbing or charity cases. It's about two people who found each other and fell in love. 6 months later, Natalie stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, preparing for her debut performance with the New York Philharmonic. The Arts Center program had opened doors she never could have imagined, and her talent had done the rest. The same critics who had once dismissed her as Daniel Stone's Waitress girlfriend were now calling her one of the most promising young pianists of her generation. In the audience, Daniel sat in the front row next to Mrs. Whitmore, Grace, and Elena, who had become an unexpected supporter once she realized that Daniel's intentions were genuine. Victor Kane was noticeably absent, having left the company 6 months earlier when the board chose Daniel's vision of socially responsible business practices over Victor's focus on pure profit. As the lights dimmed and Natalie walked onto the stage, Daniel felt his heart swell with pride and love. She looked radiant in her flowing black gown, confident and poised in a way that still took his breath away. When she sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys, the same magic that had captivated him that first night at the restaurant filled the concert hall. She played Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, a piece that demanded both technical perfection and emotional depth. As the music soared through the hall, Daniel thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, the challenges they had faced, the criticism they had weathered, the love that had grown stronger through it all. When the final notes faded and the audience erupted in thunderous applause, Natalie found Daniel's eyes in the crowd immediately. He was on his feet, applauding with tears streaming down his face, and she knew that every difficult moment had been worth it to reach this point. Later, at the reception, they stood together greeting well-wishers and critics. Natalie's engagement ring, the bigger ring Daniel had promised, sparkling on her left hand alongside the promise ring she still wore on her right. Any regrets? Daniel murmured in her ear during a quiet moment. Only that it took us so long to stop caring what other people thought, Natalie replied, leaning into his warmth. And now,